All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to talk about Chapter 5, prosecutors. We're also in Section 2, about to begin Section 2 of the textbook. And this is courtroom actors and the courtroom work group. This is Chapter 5, prosecutors. As an introduction, the prosecutor is the government's representative in the criminal court process and holds a very complex position and the highest level of importance with the highest level of importance in the function of the criminal courts and criminal justice system as a whole. Um, One, the importance stems largely from the central position the prosecutor occupies in the criminal justice system. Two, they play an active role in all phases of the system. Other actors drop out as the system progresses. Like cops, once the case goes to trial, cops are done, or unless they have to come testify, or once the trial is over, if a person's convicted, the cops are done. Same thing with certain attorneys, judges. They drop out at different phases, but the prosecutor is the one office that stays in throughout the entire thing. So they play an active role in all phases. They investigate. They're a part of investigating the crimes. Of course, when cops are investigating someone, they seek the advisement of prosecutors. They play a part in the arrest of suspects. They help get warrants and like I said, advise law enforcement when it's time to get a warrant. They even help make arguments for probable cause when they want to get a warrant. Also, they partake in the actual prosecution and trying of suspects. Then they do post-conviction sentencing as well. They're heard in the sentencing part, and they're part of that. And then on the backside, when it's time to terminate probation or parole or violate probation or parole, prosecutors involved in that too. So they're part of every part of the system. They essentially are the most important position in the criminal justice system. Contradictions of the role of the prosecutor. Of course, limited discretion. They have limited discretion, yet they're held to high ethical standards. So they can do what they want to do while also being held to high standards. Also, they're publicly elected, yet most of the work is done outside of the public eye. So we elect them publicly on the ballot, but we don't know what they're doing all the time. People that know what they're doing are people like the defense attorneys like myself, because we're in court every day. Then also they have a duty to seek justice, but operate in an adversarial rather than truth-seeking system. So the main thing that prosecutors are there for is they represent the interests of the state and the people. What that means is technically not just about convicting accused people, but it's about making sure justice is done. So even if the person accused, so what that means is if the person accused didn't do it, then the prosecutor shouldn't want to win the trial. In other words, as a matter of fact, it shouldn't get that far. If there's evidence that shows this person didn't do it, then they're ethically bound to not prosecute that person and dismiss the case. So the prosecutors, one of their functions and one of the things they do is they seek justice for everyone, even the person on the other side. If it's just that the case gets dismissed, then that's what they do. So they're there to seek justice. So they have a duty to seek justice, but one of the contradictions is we operate in an adversarial criminal justice system. You have not I won't call them enemies, but you have people working against you on the other side. You have the defense attorneys, and we don't have that same obligation to everyone. We just have an obligation to that one person that we're representing right now, our client, right? So they have to care about everybody while also taking junk from us, and I'll say that. So they have to. So it's still adversarial. So they have to seek justice, even though there's an opponent, right? So that can sometimes be a glaring contradiction, and that's why some prosecutors lose track of the seeking of justice, and it becomes adversarial and about winning and losing. And sometimes that's when wrong things happen. That's when you have a person that goes to jail for 30 years, they get exonerated by DNA evidence, and it comes out that they really didn't do it. And it's like, well, maybe if the prosecutor had focused more on justice and not winning a case, or winning and losing, maybe this person wouldn't have lost years of their life that they'll never get back. And as we see in the news, it happens way too often. There are people that get exonerated every day, like, oh yeah, we got tape, we got new footage that came out to show this person didn't do it, or there's DNA evidence, but you've been in jail 20 years. It happens way too much for comfort. So the historical evolution of the American prosecutor. Of course, the roots in the British and European system that evolved over time. American colonies followed the English system of private prosecution, where victims were tasked with prosecuting their own claims. So if someone committed a crime against you or broke a law against you, you were the victim. You had to come and prosecute them yourself. He stole my horse or whatever, and that was done in front of court. So you represented yourself. But due to the population growth and the lack of ethical standards in private prosecution, colonies began appointing deputy attorney generals to handle prosecutions in given counties and jurisdictions. So they began putting professionals, lawyers in that position. The Fed stayed with the appointment approach, where these people were appointed, and the states primarily transitioned to the election approach, where we elect this official. The federal prosecutor. The Judiciary Act of 1789 provided that within each judicial district, the attorney shall be appointed by the President of the United States and the U.S. Attorney, as the U.S. Attorney, and represent the government in federal prosecutions. Federal. United States Department of Justice is headed by the U.S. Attorney General. The deputized attorneys who are delegated to prosecute cases under him or her under the administration are called U.S. attorneys. There are 93 United States attorneys, or we'll call U.S. attorneys for short, appointed by the President of the United States for the various judicial districts, with more than 4,000 assistant or deputy U.S. attorneys working under them. So that's the federal side. Then you have the state side, state prosecutors. State systems of prosecution are extremely decentralized. That means once you get to the state, it's not one. Now, there is a person that is like the state attorney or whatever, but they don't control prosecution. They hear cases against the state in civil matters and protect the interests of the state and stuff like that. But prosecutions are done mainly on the local level. So it's very decentralized. So state systems of prosecution are extremely decentralized. Prosecutions are usually county by county. State attorney general is the state's chief legal officer representing the state in court when the state laws and policies are challenged, but plays a very limited role in the criminal trials and does not supervise the activities of local prosecutors. Attorneys who prosecute criminal cases are found at the local level. The chief prosecutor, or what we call the district attorney, or DA, who in all but 5 states is elected, and his or her deputies and assistants charge and prosecute those accused of crimes at the local county level. Once again, Avery Crump currently serves as the first black female to hold that position in Guilford County, North Carolina, and she was elected in 2018. The selection of a local prosecution attorney. How are they selected? Most jurisdictions, it's an electoral process. Usually, they serve for terms and are up for re-election after every term. That means someone can challenge them and run against them at the end of their term. Every term. There's no limit on how long they serve. If they run on the polls, they can serve for a long time. Requirements to serve as the chief prosecutor. You must be a licensed attorney in good standing, residing within the jurisdiction that you're prosecuting. Organization and operation of the prosecutor's office. Chief prosecutors, or the DAs, the chief district attorney, are less attorneys and more CEO. They delegate responsibility. They hire deputies or assistants. We call them deputies or deputy district attorneys or assistant district attorneys. And they hire staff, and they manage budgets. 3 general structural methods of prosecuting cases. You have the horizontal method or model of prosecution. And this is where assistant DAs are assigned to units that handle specific steps or functions in the judicial process that are routine in nature and involve limited discretion. So you might have one attorney that just does first appearances, one attorney in this courtroom. So at each stage, you have separate groups of a separate attorney or a separate group, a team of attorneys. An example would be one attorney or a group of attorneys may be responsible for all initial appearances, another for preliminary hearings, and others for arraignments and so on. This is usually used in larger offices due to efficiency in managing larger caseloads. Then you have the vertical model of prosecution. A case is assigned to a single prosecutor who is responsible, or single prosecutor or team of prosecutors in certain situations, who is responsible for the case at each step in the judicial process from the initial appearance through the final disposition. So that means it's one attorney, prosecuting attorney, carries the case all the way through. This is usually used in smaller jurisdictions that lack the personnel for the case and the caseload. So if you're in a rural small jurisdiction, just like Guilford County is way different than Alamance County. Alamance County is a neighboring county to the east, but we dwarf them, in size. We're huge and they're small. So just going to that courthouse is a whole different field than going over here to Guilford County or Greensboro's courthouse. So a lot of times they don't need as much personnel, so they don't have to do stuff in teams and they don't have to do stuff in the horizontal model, where you just have attorneys that handle certain steps. In that situation, you can assign one or two attorneys to handle the cases and carry them all the way through. Like I said, the advantage is that it allows victims and witnesses to deal with only one attorney, adding to their level of comfort and trust in the prosecution as it goes forward. Then you have last but not least, you have the mixed model of prosecution. And guess what that means? That means it's a hybrid of both the horizontal and vertical. It includes aspects of both horizontal model and vertical model, where most cases are handled in a horizontal manner, meaning that there are a certain set of attorneys that handle certain parts of the system. However, specific crimes are handled at all steps by a single attorney or a specialized unit. And that's how it is in Guilford County. You have your attorneys that usually do certain courtrooms based upon pulling straws or whatever. And then on a certain level, when you have more serious crimes, those attorneys handle it on a vertical level, meaning that I have the case all the way through. So it's like a mix. This meets the need of efficiency in handling routine crimes. So the routine stuff is handled kind of almost like a conveyor belt in a factory. So you only need people to be at certain places as opposed to someone carrying it all the way through. But it meets the need of efficiency in handling routine cases, but it also permits the use of expertise and case ownership for more serious offenses. Prosecutors' duties. They have both non-prosecutorial duties and they have prosecutorial duties. We'll start with the prosecutorial duties. The non-prosecutorial duties. As the government's attorney, one fundamental aspect of this position is the duty to provide legal assistance and advice to various elected officials, boards, agencies, and employees of the county regarding official matters. This doesn't happen everywhere. It doesn't happen here. Our DA just prosecutes. We have a separate county attorney who's has nothing to do with prosecuting cases, and that attorney serves as you have a city attorney and a county attorney that represents both of those jurisdictions. So the DA has nothing to do with that. So in like Guilford County, the DA is only charged with or tasked with prosecuting criminal cases and delegating responsibility in prosecuting criminal cases. But for those jurisdictions that don't, where that person is just a county attorney and they have to delegate and do prosecution as well, they have to handle personnel matters for the city, annexations, commercial development, and other land use issues, the procurement and other county contracts, also defending all lawsuits brought against the county and all city officers and employees named in lawsuits. They also do stuff like juvenile dependency matters, child support enforcement, victim assistance, and civil asset forfeitures. In North Carolina, the county attorney and DA, as I said before, are two separate people, and the officers are not connected. So we have a county attorney and a city attorney here in Guilford County and Greensboro. and the prosecutor is not even really a city or county employee. They're really a state employee. So the DA prosecutes cases in the county and for the county, but he or she is a state employee. Then you have prosecutorial duties, the prosecutorial side. One of those things is assistant law enforcement officers. Now remember, contrary to popular belief, even by some practicing prosecuting attorneys, they don't know the difference. I hate to say it, but sometimes they don't know their job. But they are not connected to law enforcement. They work closely with them, but law enforcement and prosecution are two separate entities. Now, law enforcement works closely with them because the law enforcement officers are out here making arrests and charging people with crimes, and the prosecution has the discretion. I mean, they're tasked with now prosecuting these crimes, and they also have the discretion to dismiss those crimes or do whatever they do in their prosecutorial discretion. But also, you got to think they can't be connected because there will be a conflict of interest. Because guess what? Crimes can be committed in the furtherance of law enforcement, and law enforcement can commit crimes and do wrong things that may have them in a situation where the prosecutor is in a situation where they have to prosecute them. They can't do that and be on the same team. So they're not on the same team. They work closely together. They even have people that work kind of as liaisons between the two offices, law enforcement and the prosecutor, but they're not the same. They are an outside entity that provides advisement to the officers to say, oh, you need to do this, or that's against the law, that's unconstitutional. But is tasked with prosecuting the law enforcement officers' cases based upon the evidence the law enforcement officers provide. And that's it. Other than that, the prosecution and the law enforcement are not connected in any way, other than just working together and help in that means, but they're not connected. It may look like it sometimes, but they are not. Like I said, there would be a conflict of interest if a law enforcement officer did something illegal in his or her capacity as a law enforcement officer. Organized court. In assisting law enforcement, they also organize court schedules by providing a law enforcement officer liaison to attend to the needs of law enforcement officers in court. They also meet with law enforcement to prepare for trial. The next thing they do is they screen cases and they make charging decisions. Screening cases, what does that mean? It's short and simple. It's a procedure used by the prosecutor to define which cases have prosecutive merit. In other words, which cases they're going to choose to prosecute and which cases they're not going to choose to prosecute, and assigning priority in prosecuting based on this process. So what are we going to prosecute? What are we not? What are we going to dismiss? What are we going to send the programs? What are we going to do? So that's screening cases. They also have discretion in making charging decisions. And the charging decision is just a decision that the prosecuting attorney makes on whether to charge an individual who has been arrested by the police with the crime, and if so, what charges to file, and essentially how they're going to prosecute them, what they're going to offer. Then another task, they have the task of plea bargaining. It's the process of negotiating a guilty plea. It typically involves either charge bargaining, of course, it's between the prosecutor and the defense or the defense attorney, where the prosecutor will offer to reduce the severity of charges. So charge bargaining is where they reduce the severity of charges or the number of counts in exchange for a guilty plea. And then there's something called sentencing bargaining, where the prosecutor will agree to recommend leniency at the sentencing stage. I mean, they're not going to change the charges, but they're going to they're making deals based upon how the person is going to be sentenced for that charge. So that's the difference. Then another task they have is the disclosure of evidence. Once a discovery request is made by formal motion to the court, the DA is duty bound to provide or make available all evidence in the case. This is Sixth Amendment, and this is based upon Sixth Amendment in the Brady case. They have to offer all the evidence, whether it be inculpatory. Inculpatory means evidence that tends to prove guilt. So the word culpable is Latin. Culp is Latin for guilty. Of course, in means in. So when we have a word inculpatory, that means something that tends to prove that someone is in guilt. So they have to offer that evidence. Also, exculpatory evidence. What does ex mean? Ex means out, like exit. So exculpatory evidence is evidence that tends to prove a person is not guilty or out of guilt. So evidence that tends to prove innocence. Then you have impeachment evidence as well. This is evidence that calls into question the credibility of a witness. Those are three types of evidence, stuff that has to be forked over in the discovery process prior to trial. Prior to trial and after indictment. Next, we're going to talk about assistant prosecutors at work. Working in the courtroom work group. Court is not unlike an assembly line or a factory. They're moving a lot of people through there. Court can't move without the prosecutors. They have to be, in order for court to go on, you got to have a prosecutor there. They got to call the cases for disposition. They got to discuss plea bargains, and they're also usually in charge of continuing cases. So the court day isn't going to happen if a prosecutor isn't there. Matter of fact, they call the docket to do all that stuff. Matter of fact, the judge is sometimes the last person to come to court because the prosecutors are working to have stuff for the judge to do once the judge gets in there. So prosecutors and defense attorneys are there, and the prosecutor is the most important person in court. Prosecutorial individuality is not a desired characteristic of an assistant prosecutor. They like strong policies and strong because that leads to efficiency, and so they treat everyone the same, right? They want to know that this is the policy. This if my coworker said this, and I'm going along with it because that's what we're doing. Now, as defense attorneys, we don't necessarily like that. We like for prosecutors to be able to be a little bit individualized and have their own minds and have their own discretion. Usually with prosecutorial offices like that operate like that, a lot of cases get moved because defense attorneys are putting their cases on, and a lot of stuff that comes in the court system goes out. When you have a prosecutorial system where it's strong and there's no individuality amongst the prosecutors, and there's no discretion, it is what it is, that tends to slow the process. Because now attorneys are forced into situations like it is what it is, so I might as well go to trial. And trials slow the court system down. So like I said, 90+% of cases are played out. So if we can get sweet deals, because prosecutors have some individual discretion and individuality, we can get stuff done and faster. And cases can get resolved because a lot of times that's what it's really about in court, especially traffic court. Man, we're trying to get the people out of there. So give me a deal so we can get up out of here. I don't feel like arguing with you over this. Let's argue about murders, not this. Okay, so let's get out of here. But of course, it's centralized where it's super, policy driven, and there's no individuality. It is what it is, and stuff goes slower, and it also makes it where prosecutors and defense attorneys usually don't have the best relationship in and out of court. But for the most part, prosecutorial individuality in the prosecutor's office is not a desired trait. Like I said before, defense attorneys prefer prosecutorial individuality because defense attorneys prefer that their cases be treated on an individual case-by-case basis. In other words, my client is special. I don't care what you did for everybody else today. This is my client. This is their situation. I don't want it rubber stamped. I want a reduction of this and that. The expansion of the prosecutor's discretionary power. The discretion is vast because there are little to no checks on many of the decisions that are made in the prosecutor's office. Most of the decisions are made behind closed doors, and by the time they become public, it's too late. Mandatory and structured sentencing took discretion away from judges and placed it into the hands of the prosecutor. So the judges don't have any discretion in sentencing until a person pleads guilty or is found guilty. And whether or not they plead guilty or found guilty, that all lays in the lap of the prosecutor. So with structured sentencing, that is very rigid guidelines that judges have to go by when they sentence. So at the top of the page, you have the person's criminal record. In other words, where they land on this scale of criminal records. Are they a level 1 This is North Carolina, which means there's no criminal history, or their level sits at the top, which means they've been wilding all their life and they got a long, extensive criminal history. You got that, and then down the running across from the top, from the bottom of the page to the top, you have the classification of crimes. So what crime were they charged with, and where does it classify on that list? Lower because it's not as serious, not as dangerous, or higher because it's crazy, like a murder or rape. So there are two variables. There's the individual defendant and their criminal history, so where they go left to right on the page, versus the crime itself and where it lands from the bottom to the top of the page, and where those intersect, that is the sentencing range. So judges are locked into sentencing in that box. Now, is there a little bit there? There is some wiggle room where judges can have some discretion in sentencing. They can sentence them in the presumptive range, which is in the middle. They can mitigate the sentencing in the mitigated range. And if there are aggravating factors that are proven beyond a reasonable doubt at trial or agreed to by the defendant pre-plea, then they can also sentence them in the aggravated range. But they have to be sentenced in that box. So the judges have very little discretion. So we get there and we get to the point of sentencing based upon what the prosecutor decides to do, and that has nothing to do with the judge. So if the prosecutor wants to not even charge them with that crime and say, I'll dismiss that and I'll reduce it down to this, then that takes away from the judge. The judge can only sentence what's in front of them and how they're convicted and what they're convicted of. Now, a judge can choose to accept or not to accept a plea arrangement and say, hey, take it to someone else, but I don't like it. But the prosecutor has the discretion, and it is literally that prosecutor's individual work product with the defense attorney when they're in there doing a plea. So the prosecutor, they got the juice, they got the power, they have discretion. So the structured sentencing has given them more power. Prosecutorial ethics and misconduct. The position doesn't always come with public approval or popularity because of the amount of power and discretion. There's what they call a veil of impropriety or inaccessibility for most prosecutors, right? So people see them, it's like, it's a prosecutor. And then, of course, just traditionally in certain communities, the prosecutors are they're not the cops, as I said before, but they're kind of with the cops. So it's like, he's the cops. So even the way they're kind of treating the public, I am a defense attorney, been only a defense attorney my entire career. So I'm looked at differently out in the streets, right? When I go to the barbershop, it's like, oh, that's my attorney. Oh, what's up, man? How you doing? But if you're prosecuting cases and you're sending people to jail, and normally being a prosecuting attorney is not a job that requires people skills. You can be a total jerk. Some are. You can't be a jerk in my line of business because I won't make money if I'm a jerk. So I have to. I believe in customer service. So I can't be a jerk. I got to be approachable. But they don't have to be, and sometimes they choose not to be. Most of the time, they choose not to be. So how they act in court, they're prosecuted. That is going to directly affect how they're treated in the public. So I can go in the barbershop and chill out without being bothered. Everybody loves me. Oh, what's up, man? What happened to court? As opposed to some of my buddies who are prosecutors, they're getting their hair cut in another county or something. It's like, bro, I can go anywhere I want to in Greensboro, any hood, everyone knows me. But they can't do it. That's just somewhat how it is. So the adversarial criminal justice system, a system of two opposing sides, has led to creating a chasm or a gap between the prosecution and defense. So, of course, there's an automatic gap because we're opposing parties, right? Rather than both sides working to find the truth. Both sides are working to win or beat one another, which can lead to bad outcomes sometimes. Prosecutors can be more focused on wins and losses and numbers rather than justice. And remember I said before, they're actually there to seek justice because they're representing the interest of the people. The wrong thing happening is against the interest of the people. So you have something called malicious prosecution. That's prosecutorial action against someone knowing that they are likely not guilty or that there is exculpatory evidence. Prosecution without, and it's also called prosecution without probable cause or reasonable suspicion. In other words, you're prosecuting someone knowing and having reason to know that they didn't do it, or there's a high likelihood, or even any likelihood at all that they didn't do it. But you're moving forward knowing that. That is malicious prosecution. Prosecutorial misconduct. That's when there are breaches of the prosecutor's ethical duties. There are different types of prosecutorial misconduct. There's making inappropriate or inflammatory comments in the presence of a jury during trial, introducing or attempting to introduce inadmissible, inappropriate, or inflammatory evidence in the trial, mischaracterizing the evidence or the facts of a case, which is essentially lying, committing and lying is a no-no across the board when it comes to attorneys. We're supposed to be truthful. So that's not even just a prosecutor thing. That's an attorneys in general. We can't lie. Can't get caught lying. Committing violations pertaining to the selection of a jury. So you're essentially, usually that's based upon race. Like, you have some prosecutors that are still the good old boys, and they're like, this is a black male over here. He was dating a white girl, or he's accused of raping a white girl. I want an all-white male jury. And that's obvious. When we walk into court and see how the jury looks, it is what it is. Like, oh, no, we're going to appeal. This can't happen this way. Then you have making improper closing arguments. So that's just for like courtroom misconduct. Also, you have mishandling physical evidence, hiding or destroying or tampering with evidence, failing to disclose exculpatory evidence, threatening, badgering, or tampering with witnesses, using false or misleading evidence, harassing, displaying bias towards or having a vendetta against the defendant or the defendant's counsel. That's selective or vindictive prosecution, or purposeful denial of a speedy trial, especially when you know a person you don't like is in custody, so you take your time trying the case. So it becomes more of a war of attrition. That's why a lot of times that's why people plead guilty. That's why it's one of the reasons why 90+% of cases are guilty pleas, because people are in custody. So if you can make a deal today that involves you saying you did something that you didn't do, but you can go home today, it's like, no brainer. I'll take the little probation. I just want to go home. And that literally, I've like, but you didn't do it. And I've had clients say, I don't care. Get me home. And I have to do what I have to do. But then you have improper behavior during grand jury proceedings. And of course, we'll talk about grand juries later. Community prosecution. This involves a partnership amongst the prosecutor's office, law enforcement, and the community, in which the authority and power possessed by the prosecutor's office are used to identify and solve problems, enhance public safety, and improve quality of life in the community. So when we talk about community prosecution, that's one of the things that humanizes or makes a prosecutor more accessible. It makes him more of a kind of a, what would I say, a public relief or public, I won't say public policy, I'm thinking the word, a public sector, someone that's loved by the public and accepted because they're doing things to make the community better, and they're in the community, they can be touched, they're tangible. Let me see, they facilitate mediation, or what we call, or ADR, alternative dispute resolution, as opposed to taking everything to trial or doing everything in court. They impose civil sanctions and other non-traditional remedies in an effort to eradicate the problem faced by the community. So rather than criminally prosecuting and sentencing everyone, sometimes making people just do community service or making them do something is better than incarceration. And they can act, and sometimes, because what you have to realize is crime has direct correlation to economics. If people don't have jobs, can't find jobs, can't feed their family, they're more likely to steal from you, to rob you, to sell dope, to do what they feel they have to do to make ends meet. That's all crime is about, making ends meet. So if with community prosecution, if they can get to the bottom of what's making people commit crimes and what put them in that position, then they might be able to turn things around and solve the everyday problems of these people, so that they're less likely to recidivize or commit crimes in the first place. The core elements of community prosecution: It's a proactive approach to crime. So it's rather than being reactive and letting crime happen and then responding, you try to do things proactively before crimes happen to see if you can make the community a better place and rid it of crime without having to go through the prosecutorial and court process. You have to have a defined target area. Find the areas that need the most and focus on those areas and changing those areas, and it'll help the crime in the entire community. Also, there's an emphasis on problem solving, public safety, and quality of life issues. Then another thing that's important is partnerships between the prosecutor, the community, law enforcement, and others to address the crime and disorder. And there's also use of varied enforcement methods. So, okay, that is it. That is it for the prosecution chapter. That is chapter 6. No, I'm sorry, chapter 5. So once again, here's our book. As I said before, the website is edge.sagepub.com / or / I guess, Hemmens, HEMMENS, the number 4 and the letter E. And that'll take you directly to the online sources for the book. It's called Edge at sagepub.com. So if you have the book, it's on the back of the book. And if you don't have the book, what I would say is go to the www.sagepub.com. That's sagepub.com. Click and just enter that, and it'll give you, and you can actually do a search for the book. And you know the book's name, Criminal Courts, a Contemporary Perspective, 4th edition. And the book will come up, and you can go, and you can, of course, you got to do some searching. I'm not going to hold your hand to the process, but search and find the online resources for the book, so you can actually do quizzes. So that'll help you master this stuff. So read and do that, and you'll be good. So you guys take care. Bye-bye.